The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has been working on an initiative called Engineering with Nature. It all started in 2010. And this is the EWN Podcast. EWN is developing and implementing nature-based solutions for water and infrastructure projects. It's bringing together a growing international community of scientists, engineers, and researchers from all kinds of disciplines that are committed to harnessing the power of nature to solve problems. The EWN Podcast tells their stories. Now here's your host, Sarah Thorne of Decision Partners.
Well, here we are. It's like old home week. Welcome to Season 7, Episode 4. Jeff King, lead of the Engineering with Nature program, and I are really thrilled to welcome back a familiar voice, Dr. Todd Bridges, our friend, colleague, and I'd say truly the inspiration behind Engineering with Nature. Todd is now Professor of Practice for Resilient and Sustainable Systems in the College of Engineering at the University of Georgia. Welcome back, Todd.
It's great to be here and be heard.
Todd, it's great to have you back, and we've got so much to catch up on today.
I'd say a lot of water over the dam in the last year. About a year ago, actually, February 28th, 2023, we did a special episode of the EWN Podcast celebrating Todd's 30-year career with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And as you know, most of our listeners would know, among many other things, Todd was the founder and national lead of the Engineering with Nature program. So Todd, when you retired from the Army Corps of Engineers, you only took a month off, and then you jumped literally headfirst into academic life at the University of Georgia. Tell us what you've been up to.
That's a long invite to tell you what I've been up to. I clearly have failed at retirement. I'll tell you that right now. That's my first confession of the afternoon. I'm as busy now, if not more so in some respects, than I was before. But you know, I think busy life, happy life. That's my way of going. And yes, I am now at the University of Georgia in the College of Engineering and part of the Institute for Resilient Infrastructure Systems here at UGA. There's a lot going on, and I'm sure we're going to get into all the various and sundry elements of that over the last 11 months that I've been at UGA. I'm happy to talk with both of you about that.
Well, you're smiling, and you're smiling a lot. Mm-hmm. So I know that there's a lot of positive things happening for you, and I was hoping that we could get you to talk a little bit about this transition. So Todd, you spent 30 years in the Corps, a lot of that as a senior research scientist, and then you go over and you start working in academia. And so can you tell us a little bit about what that has been like for you?
Yeah, I can. Change is interesting. I'd say, change is a part of life. You need to embrace it. And we all need it, of course, in healthy aliquots, perhaps. But change is good. It keeps you young to a degree and keeps you energized, which it's done in this case. Anita and I have had many conversations about this transition, of course, during this period of time. And she says, well, what do they want you to do at UGA? I was having lunch one day with my school chair, and I said, Bjorn, what do you want me to do? And he said, no, Todd, this is the wrong question. The question is, what do you want to do? And when he said that, I said, Todd is in the right place. What do I want to do? Yes. So I've been busy about that.
Perfect. One might say it took 30 years for you to realize that was what you really wanted to do.
The 30 years that I was blessed to have with the Corps of Engineers, I wouldn't trade for anything that I could trade for it. I mean, it was vastly fulfilling in so many ways, on so many levels. But change is necessary for many different reasons. And I've been enjoying embracing the change and continuing to do whatever I can to make a difference.
Well, that's wonderful. And we knew that you would make a really good transition to becoming an academic. We want to hear a little bit about how you and Anita are adjusting to life in Athens, Georgia, after being in Vicksburg, Mississippi for such a long time.
Yeah, well, that's a big transition, especially when you've accumulated as much stuff as you tend to accumulate when you've lived in one place for 30 years and you've gotten to that point of your life. So the physical move, of course, was its own, challenge and burden, but we have gotten settled into a nice place and with views outside my office window of a forest and nature. It's very energizing to me. I think we landed exactly where it was intended for us to land, and we are engaging with the community, and Anita's found some things to do, in and beyond taking care of Todd, which is a very Herculean type of commitment that she has.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Yes. Yeah. Todd is one of those challenging people who thinks he's easy, but is really difficult, right? So those are the most difficult people to manage and to be partnered with. Bless Anita for it.
She's a master at it too. We give her a lot of credit for that, I think, Jeff.
Oh, certainly. Yeah, she does do a lot. Absolutely. And it's amazing to see her in action as well.
Anybody that would go on a road trip with Todd and do all the driving and all the organizing for weeks on end while he was exploring engineering with nature on the road, the woman must be a saint.
We certainly got our share of strange looks because Anita sits in the front seat and drives, and I sit in the back seat and work. So people would see they see this woman getting out of the front seat, and then they see this guy getting out of the back seat, and people look like, what's going on over there? Yeah, it works for us.
Just part of her job description. So listen, I want to talk about what you've been doing. You've had this really unique opportunity to spread your wings, do new things, explore new things as an academic. Talk about some of the opportunities that you've had so far and some of the things you've accomplished in your first, I was going to say year, but it's literally 11 months at UGA.
Yeah, 11 months. Well, there are some high points and there's some other points, of course. I mean, some of the things that I guess I could highlight that in the last 11 months, I have attended and participated in 2 White House events. Last year in April, the White House organized a summit on Invest in Nature that brought together people and organizations from across the country to identify not just the opportunity to invest in nature, but what we will derive from doing that as a society and as communities. And it was quite inspiring to be there and to participate with my colleagues from UGA in that event, which had at its kind of centerpiece nature-based solutions. And then this past September, another White House event that was called the Climate Resilience Summit, where people and communities, again, about 100 people from across the country were invited to the White House to talk about the challenge before communities of all types and sizes and in different landscape contexts around the country on how to develop resilience that makes a difference for people and in the many ways that it would. So last May, I traveled to Singapore, my first visit to Singapore. I think that's the longest plane travel I've ever done. I think I was in the air for 22 hours or something like that. To participate on a scientific advisory panel. Singapore has started a marine climate change science program. As an island state, they have particular challenges to come to grips with respect to climate change, and they're making a rather significant investment in research to inform their strategies and their engineering with respect to climate change. So it was very interesting to see how they're approaching that and to give them feedback on what's going on elsewhere, particularly in the United States and in the Engineering with Nature program. And then most recently, and in fact, the announcement just came out officially just a few minutes ago. I've been asked to serve as one of 11 lead authors on the country's first national nature assessment. And this was a commitment that President Biden made back in April of 2022 to have an assessment conducted to assess, if you will, the contributions that nature makes to society in various ways and at various levels, and how that should, understanding of that should be taken into account in decision making and actions that we take collectively and individually in society to, I would say, support nature so nature can support us. And I've been asked to lead a chapter which the working title of which is Nature and the Safety and Security of the United States.
Well, Todd, hey, that sounds great. Congratulations. And it does sound like a big job. And everything you've been doing just shows that you're not letting grass grow under your feet at all. I mean, you are in constant motion. And so back to the National Nature Assessment, can you unpack that for us a little bit more in terms of your vision for what this chapter might look like?
Right. Well, we're just getting underway. And as a lead author of that chapter, one of the responsibilities I have is to help select contributing authors and contributors to that chapter, which, as you can imagine, would be a very significant undertaking in and of itself. And to just contemplate how you can distill, into however many thousands of words, all the ways in which our life as humans and our lives as communities are dependent really wholly upon nature and what nature provides to us. That's a very daunting and kind of awesome thing to think about. How do you distill all that down into just a few words? But this is a beginning journey, this National Nature Assessment, to try to communicate what all is involved in developing a relationship, progressing, I would say, a relationship with nature in the 21st century that is more balanced, I would say, that is more in harmony with our long-term interests. We're stuck with the planet. The planet's kind of stuck with us. We need to figure out how to get along.
It's a bit of a formidable task. And since we last did a show on the NNA, I think the deadline is end of this year, is it not, to have all the pieces put together?
Well, I mean, it's certainly significantly underway. I think the report is scheduled to actually be published and presented in 2026.
Okay.
But that is just 2 years, which, as you can imagine, something that has the scope of a national nature assessment, that's not very much time, actually.
Pretty tight timeline.
To put something, to put something together like this. But I'm excited by this opportunity and to work with colleagues from across the country and laying out the information. It's daunting on several levels. If you get me thinking about this too much, I might start.
Okay, we're going to move on.
Worrying. I don't want to worry about it. Okay, yeah. I don't want to worry. I want to be inspired.
We want you to be inspired. I know from LinkedIn and everything else that you've been doing a lot of public speaking, a lot of teaching in the past year.
So, some people might think, that's just all he does is yammer. But I do really like to listen too. I think one of the great benefits of being invited to speak in different places is the opportunity you have to actually converse with other people. I mean, that's really what I get out of it. I'm so energized by opportunities to meet new people, smart people who have thoughts to share with me and with others about these topics that are so important to me. It's invigorating. So, I've been doing a fair amount of that. I mean, some give you a sense of the flavor and the distribution of these things, a colleague with the insurance company AXA, which is one of the largest insurance companies in the world, based in France, invited me to give a training seminar. They have a seminar series. They actually, in the United States, AXA XL insures thousands of engineers and architects, and they put on a training program for engineers and architects that they insure, and they incentivize them for that. Well, he asked me to give a training seminar on nature-based solutions, and I said, okay, well, that sounds good. And I said, well, how many people are you maybe expecting to dial into this webinar? And he said, probably around 800, something like that. I said, okay. So I did that, and there were some really good questions and feedback that was offered there. And interestingly enough, I did that webinar while I was at Mississippi State University, and they had invited me to give what they call their Waldorf lecture on the environment at Mississippi State. And that was also, I think, a very stimulating experience, 200 students and faculty in a room listening to me wax on about engineering with nature-based solutions. It's really those kinds of experiences. It's impossible to not be energized by that and to be inspired by those kinds of experiences. And that's why I do it. And, it kind of all started. My first official day on the job at UGA, I got put to work and offering my first lecture to a class, a graduate course on natural infrastructure. And that was a great experience. I took a picture with the students and posted on LinkedIn afterwards. And I had several people commenting about, I didn't draw any attention to it, about how diverse the class was. In fact, I think of about the 20 students, 3 were male and 17 were female. This is an engineering course, okay? And students there from the Middle East and from South America and from all over the country. Engineering and science looks a lot different today than it did way back when Jeff and I were going to school. And that's a good thing.
That's right. It is indeed.
Yeah. I recently got my first graduate student, master's student, bless his heart. Scott's a courageous soul. And when I tell you where he comes from, you can say, well, that makes a lot of sense. He's actually a captain, active service in the U.S. Army. And the Army is supporting him and coming to UGA to work on his master's degree in engineering. And of all things, this Army captain wants to focus on in his research is nature-based solutions. I think, that's how... Just think about that. The symbolic nature of that. An Army captain coming to work on his master's in engineering, wanting to work on natural infrastructure. I think if that's not inspiring to you, I don't know what is.
Yeah.
Or what would be.
Yeah. Well, Todd, I think this is a wonderful opportunity for Scott, having worked with you for so many years. I know firsthand that he's going to be able to learn so much by having that interaction with you, and just looking forward to hearing more about Scott, his project, and everything that you all are doing together. And then Todd, the other thing here too is the Network for Engineering with Nature. And I know that you are very passionate about that. You've been spending quite a lot of time with the network and all of the different organizations affiliated with it. And we've seen a lot of growth within the network. And I was hoping that you could talk a little bit about that with us and tell us more about some of the Network for Engineering with Nature's major accomplishments.
I'm happy to do that. And you both have heard me say this before, but now it's become one of my trite expressions, but progress runs on the rails of relationships.
I think we have heard that.
I think that's a universal.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yes, I think that this is a universal, and this is true in the context of nature-based solutions as well. And it's the motivation really behind the Network for Engineering with Nature and the collaboration between the Engineering with Nature program and the University of Georgia, the Institute for Resilient Infrastructure Systems, back in 2018, 2019, when we stood up the Network for Engineering with Nature. The whole intention here was to bring organizations together across the multi-sector universe, government, the private sector, NGOs, universities, to work together to advance these approaches, to accelerate and upscale nature-based solutions. And I'm very encouraged by what I'm seeing in the growth. We have more than 25 partners in this effort that are committing their own sweat equity and digging in, rolling up their sleeves, whichever term of art you want to use in this regard, and contributing jointly through their collaboration to advance these kinds of approaches in meaningful ways across the country. And we just had, as you know, Jeff, a summit on nature-based solutions, an industry summit that we organized here at the University of Georgia and the Institute for Resilient Infrastructure Systems. As an example, we had 100 people from across the country, 50 different private sector organizations, companies, and nonprofits come together for 2 days to identify ways in which we could advance these kinds of approaches. And it's great to see people, working together, at that level meaningfully, I think, to contribute across their perspectives and views and their talents and ideas. Also very inspiring.
You know what I think is so neat is that when you're talking about all these things, ideas like multi-sectoral, collaborative, co-creating solutions, those are now mainstream ideas. It's just how things get done. And I think that Noon has really demonstrated that, really advancing the practice of engineering with nature in a whole bunch of different ways. But they were pretty new ideas when you first started talking about them not that many years ago.
Yeah, as you know, Sarah, there really isn't anything too easy about meaningful collaboration. It's a lot of work, to set it up, to set the conditions and the parameters of that. And I would say it's even perhaps more challenging when you have to bridge disciplinary boundaries to do that. It's one thing to collaborate and everybody's a lawyer in the room and you're all lawyers and that still can be challenging, of course. But in the context of nature-based solutions, we've got lawyers and economists and engineers and ecologists and designers and anthropologists, and the list kind of goes on and on and on. And that presents challenges because every discipline has its own language, its way of communicating, its way of actually framing questions and problems. And I think the way to do that is to give people an opportunity to work on real stuff.
Yeah.
Right. Not to maybe theorize about what they ought to do in a vacuum someplace, but to actually work on real projects. And that's where we're concentrating our efforts through the Noon.
Well, and I think another big part of it is communicating what you're achieving and doing it through the Engineering with Nature podcast, doing it through the websites, the Noon website, the presentations, the seminars, all those things. It's great. Mm-hmm. And you're also, as I understand it, you're also co-hosting a podcast, giving us a bit of a run for our money from what I understand. I've listened to your podcast.
I don't know about that.
I've listened to your podcast. It's called Resilient Futures Podcast, and it's well done. You're doing a great job. Talk a little bit about the podcast and your co-host.
Yeah, my co-host, Dr. Alicia Helmrich, great assistant professor in the College of Engineering at UGA. She's I would say, a systems engineer at heart, which is great to talk with her and her students and how they think about these kinds of challenges and opportunities. And Alicia's had a lot of experience with podcasts, and so we kind of adapted and kind of modified, if you will, some of the things that she had been doing in another podcast and came up with this idea of focusing on resilience, which is consistent with IRIS, the Institute for Resilient Infrastructure Systems. So we're focusing on what does it take to create resilience for a whole variety of different contexts. In fact, I recorded with Alicia a podcast just this morning, actually, going to be maybe our next episode coming out next week, where we have a historian whose area of specialty is the ancient history of the Bronze Age. Wrote a great book called 1177, The Year Civilization Collapsed. And Eric and one of our colleagues at ERDEC, Ben Trump, have been looking at how to take information about this really collapse of several civilizations in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Aegean at the close of the Bronze Age, and how to take information from archaeology and to do social network modeling using current tools and mathematics to understand, okay, how did this collapse happen? What were the contributors to it? And understand how that relates to developing resilience today. So those are the kind of topics that very stimulating to explore in conversation. As I said, yeah, of course Todd would do a podcast because he likes to talk. No, actually, Todd likes to talk with other people. Todd likes to talk with other people, and a podcast is a useful excuse to have conversations with other people.
Yeah. For our listeners out there, I didn't say that. Todd said that. So I want to make sure we understand who's talking. But anyways, Todd, this is a wonderful, wonderful illustration to me that, podcasts are really a wonderful way for us to be able to connect with those out there that are interested in things like nature-based solutions or engineering with nature, or in this case, resilience. And this episode you just described sounded incredible, absolutely incredible. So you've got now another listener that you can add in terms of who will be checking out what you all are talking about. So really excited about where you're taking this new part of your career. And certainly I always thought that you needed to be in front of a microphone and have a podcast wherever you went.
Anita has told me many times in our married life, you just like to listen to yourself talk. I said, well, okay, I'll confess up to that a little bit. But seriously, it's having to talk is the price you pay to get other people to talk. I really enjoy conversation.
We know
you do have a way.
And you're good at it.
Yeah, he is, and you have a way of making people feel good when they talk to you and wanting to share information because you are genuinely interested, and that is the absolute truth. And you always find a way to help people and encourage people through those conversations.
Well, I appreciate that testimonial, Jeff.
Wow. Woo-hoo. Okay. I'm going to bring us back to this podcast. You guys were recently in Washington, D.C. together in February. You were at the Policy Forum for Nature-Based Solutions, which was, as Todd, you may have mentioned, sponsored by the Network for Engineering with Nature and also the National Academy of Sciences Gulf Research Program. And as I understand it, this was really a follow-on from the wonderful Measuring What Matters Summit that was held in November 2022. We talked about that in Season 5, Episode 4. So, Jeff, maybe if you could talk a little bit about the forum and what the focus of it was, and then talk about really what's been accomplished.
Well, sure. And, this is another great example of where the Network for Engineering with Nature can really leverage all of those expertise and connections to deliver on something that is so meaningful and so profound. And working with the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, wonderful venue. And I think this was just a home run all the way around. And so with this event, and I will go ahead and say, Sarah, we need to go ahead and put the link in on the page for this podcast,
sure.
So people can actually go back and watch it. It has been recorded. It lives at the National Academy website, and happy to make sure people get that link. But for this event, we had over 200 people there in the audience, and my understanding is we had 1,600 live views of the webcast over that 2-day period. And it attracted a very diverse audience. We had individuals there representing the financing industry. We had folks there talking about regulatory hurdles and challenges. We had experts there to share with us information about equity and environmental justice. And just wonderful topics, great discussions all the way around. Again, really offering what I think are the highlights of what's happening in this space, where we still have certain obstacles, maybe challenges to overcome with respect to accelerating use of nature-based solutions. But by all accounts, some really good informative information being shared with the audience, and I got super excited about it and thinking about what those next steps might look like.
Yeah, that's great. Todd, what were the takeaways? What's been accomplished in the last year and a bit?
Well, I mean, the Measuring What Matters event that we had at the National Academies in November 22 is very important to focus on how we collectively as a society or as agencies think about the benefits and costs that come from interventions, whether they're in the form of infrastructure or other investments that are made. And this policy forum that we had this winter was to step, a couple paces in front of that, and to consider, well, how do you draw the resources from across the public and the private sector to implement these solutions? So we had a theme related to finance. And then we have a whole system in government for how we inform interventions of various types through regulation. And if you think about our regulatory system in the United States as it pertains to the environment, it's literally over a generation old in general. The National Environmental Policy Act, the really kind of foundational legislation, was passed in 1969. So we have a regulatory framework that you could argue is basically 50 years old, and we have challenges and opportunities before us today that are much different than the challenges and opportunities that were most germane 50 years ago. So how do we create a decision-making process, a regulatory system that actually creates a nature-positive society? That's much different than creating and using regulation to minimize impact or harm on the environment. No, how do we create a nature-positive footprint, if you will? And then the third major element is, as Jeff indicated, was equity. How do we ensure that all are served by investments in infrastructure? And I think nature-based solutions in particular are well suited for providing benefits across all of our community in a variety of different ways. It was a great event. There were a lot of notable and important things that were said. I tried to capture some of those in my LinkedIn post about the forum with some of the quotes, including one from Dr. Jeff King, that nature-based solutions must be part of the solution set. And if Jeff says it, it must be true.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When we talked right after the Measuring What Matters Summit, one of the things that really impressed me was the participants' really fervent desire to take action now, that there was an imperative to take action now. What was the sense at the forum? Did you get that same sense of urgency?
Well, I felt it. Yeah, I definitely felt it. And, just to share, another Amanda Stout, who's the senior director for Climate Crossroads at the National Academy of Sciences, who led us off in the morning. This is what, one of the things that Amanda said, this is a time when we need to be bold. Mm-hmm. And I think her sentiments there were reflected in what others had to say at the meeting. So I definitely picked up on more than just a vibe of urgency. I picked up on a vibe of commitment on the part of many, if not all, of the participants and the organizations there. They're ready to take action. So how do we coordinate the actions to produce the scale of intervention that's needed? I mean, I tried to frame this in my closing remarks, and I put it this way. Speaking to the audience, that our responsibility is to create a wave of change that sweeps across our country and institutions to produce thousands of nature-based solutions over millions of acres, from sea to shining sea. That's what I think our call, should be. That's the scale of intervention that's needed to right the balance, to get this balance between human society and nature.
Yeah. Well, that's inspiring in and of itself. And I know that coming out of the forum, I was certainly energized, and others felt the same way. And for me, I think this was where people really did sort of jump on and start to think about, what can I do? What can I do to help carry this load and to be able to get these projects moving in a very positive direction? And I also have to think about like a snapshot in time. 5 years ago, Todd, we were not at this place. You and I were not at this particular point in time where nature-based solutions were ubiquitous. We're now constantly talking about it. Not only that, we have more and more projects that are coming online, and you can actually see that. And I know that that's becoming more and more a part of the conversations that I'm having each and every day. And I'll just go ahead and talk about the Engineering with Nature Atlas as well as a good testimony for how this is evolving. I mean, when we first did Atlas Volume 1, we basically used each and every project that we had received in terms of the applications that were complete and with the pictures that they had provided. In Atlas Volume 3, we couldn't use all of them. I think we had 25 plus actual additional projects that we just basically had to say, we've got to stay at the coffee table size book. We can't make this any larger. So I think that's a good indicator, at least one indicator, that more and more people are thinking about these kind of projects, wanting to prioritize these kind of projects. And I'm excited to sort of be here talking with you about what it looks like now and where we're going.
There's been a convergence of thinking and alignment, of need and opportunity here that we got to capitalize on, I think, to make a difference for the country and for communities. Of course, we're gonna need a lot of improvements in what you and I would consider conventional infrastructure, but I think it's very important in the opportunity that's before us now, and in the challenge that's before us now in the United States, is to not leave nature out of the solution, but to embrace nature as a part of the solution as we upgrade and as we rehabilitate, to use that term that's used in engineering, the aging infrastructure that we confront. And of course, it's not just the United States. Countries around the world are in the same predicament. As we've cited these figures before, that estimates range to, $100 trillion are being invested in infrastructure around the world by mid-century. Let's include nature in those solutions. It should 100% of it should be nature-positive infrastructure. That's what it should be.
As one of our former guests said, let's put nature at the center and work from there. That's exciting.
Amen. Amen.
So before we wrap up, I need to talk to you about what's coming up for the rest of 2024. What do you hope to accomplish by the end of the year? Whoa.
Well, yeah, really. There's a lot going on in terms of reporting out on our industry summit on nature-based solutions. That's what I'm looking to right now. Making sure that people have the benefit of all the great ideas that were discussed and offered up when we had those 100 folks together from 50 organizations in November. I want to respect their ideas and share them with others so we can figure out how to advance that conversation. That is how we can create some genuine synergy between the public and the private sector and our ability to accelerate and upscale nature-based solutions. Something that we're also quite excited about, proud of at the University of Georgia is that we are launching a graduate certificate in natural infrastructure or nature-based solutions. So that students coming in, whether they're coming into engineering or they're coming into ecology or to design or wherever they are, can make a commitment beyond their degree and get a certification in nature-based solutions.
Wow.
And I'm very happy to be committed to teaching one of the core course requirements for that, the fundamentals of nature-based solutions, that my colleague Brian Bledsoe and I created in, I think, a pretty mature form this past fall. So, there's a whole new generation that's coming out of schools across the country like UGA, and they have a different point of view about what they want to see their world look like. And I'm encouraged by what they want, and I want to support them in that effort. And I think the graduate certificate, which goes live in the fall of 2024 at UGA, is one way that we can support them, in that journey. We're going to have a number of other convenings of a variety of types, including one that we have coming up just next week, focused on the national security aspects of nature-based solutions. And Jeff's going to be with us. We're very proud to have him with us at UGA next week to talk about this for the application of nature-based solutions. And we're looking forward to hosting Miss Rachel Jacobson, the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Installations, Energy, and Environment with us next week. And the commitment of her office and her organization on how we can use nature to support the resilience of our nation's national security assets in the form of our military installations. So there's a lot to do and a lot to be excited about in the remainder of 2024.
Yeah, and Todd, I'm looking forward to us getting to work together, to continue to work together, and certainly excited about getting up to the University of Georgia next week and seeing you and Ms. Jacobson and the rest of the team. And I also am looking forward to the Network for Engineering with Nature, the summit that we will have in May. And I think that's another wonderful opportunity for us to share ideas and to be able to identify opportunities for prioritizing actual projects, as you had said earlier, where the network is able to work collaboratively to move out and have some of those projects be constructed. So lots of wonderful opportunities ahead, absolutely. And then, Todd, as we think about your retirement and all these other wonderful things that you have planned, you've done so much already. What is perhaps a broad vision, one of those must-do kind of things that you'd like to see happen in the next, say, 3 to 5 years?
Wow. You're asking me to think big and beyond.
That's what you always do. That's what you always do.
Yeah. I'm committed to advancing this idea of connecting and creating synergy between the public and the private sector in this space. I really think that's the opportunity that we have to really make kind of game-changing progress on how we use nature-based solutions, to correct the balance, and being able to help convene, if you will, and facilitate that dialogue between finance and engineering, and I would say kind of asset holding, companies and organizations, whether they're utilities or the chemical industry or the forestry industry, forest product industry. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Agriculture.
Very good.
We have to figure out, I think we have to figure out how to create that connectivity between the intentions laid out by the public sector and agencies with what's happening and the needs of the private sector.
I think it's a perfect role for you, Todd. It's kind of like the sum total of everything that you've learned, everything that you're passionate about, and now taking it to others, being a catalyst for the kind of change that has to happen.
let me put it this way. I think the future is bright for engineering with nature.
I've heard that before.
I think I've heard it too.
And it's still true. It's more true today than it was before.
I agree.
The future is brighter than bright for Engineering with Nature. Todd, it's been absolutely marvelous to have you back on the Engineering with Nature podcast. We love hearing from you. You're not really a guest. Academic life really seems to suit you, but it hasn't changed you too much. So we're really pleased about that. Thanks for coming back on the show. Come back again.
I'm always happy to talk to two of my favorite people about my favorite subject. I mean, the only thing that would make this better would be chocolate cake.
Well, virtually, we got to figure out how to do that.
We'll put that on Dave.
Well, I noticed Dave put on his sunglasses when we started talking about the future getting bright. So that's a nice little concluding sort of vision for us.
Exactly. Dave's got his sunglasses on. The storyline has now disintegrated into chocolate cake, which pretty much all of our podcasts with Todd have focused on chocolate cake. So it's time to say thank you all so much for listening. We promise we'll bring Todd back on again. We hope you've enjoyed this podcast, and we sure hope you'll join us again when we talk about engineering with nature.
You've been listening to the EWN Podcast, developed by Sarah Thorne and Jeff King, National Lead, Engineering with Nature Initiative, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Now, for more information, you can visit our website, engineeringwithnature.org. The EWN Podcast is produced by Eye Contact Productions for the Engineering with Nature program within the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. I'm Dave Trafford.